Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a topic you all wanted to know more about: mental health challenges faced by the Black community.
It's an important conversation.
Yeah, we've got this really diverse set of sources to help us unpack it all. So,
Research papers.
right, historical documents, even some personal narratives.
Oh, and some really unexpected stuff, too.
Right. Like, get this, one of our sources is Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
I know, right?
Seems a little out of left field, but trust me, it'll make sense as we go.
It offers a really surprising but relevant lens.
Yeah, so to kick things off, can you tell us a bit about how Paine's ideas about government and individual rights connect back to the historical context of mental health in the Black community?
Sure. So Paine, back in 1776, was making this super fiery case for American independence.
Yeah, basically arguing that people should govern themselves.
Exactly. Not be ruled by, like, some distant power.
Right.
And one of his most famous quotes, it goes, "Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state, an intolerable one."
Wow.
Yeah. And now think about that quote, but through the lens of, the Black community's experience here in America.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right, where systems of power like healthcare, social services, the justice system, things that should be helping.
They're often designed to help.
Exactly, have often ended up being sources of inequality or even, harm.
So this deep-seated distrust of institutions, you're saying, it goes all the way back to what Paine was railing against in the 1700s.
Absolutely.
And that it's still a huge factor in mental health within the Black community today.
Yeah. It can make people hesitant to seek help, to trust professionals.
Or even just to talk about their struggles.
Right, exactly. And when we look at which institutions have really fostered this distrust, our sources point to some pretty clear answers.
Like,
Healthcare, big one.
makes sense.
There's this long history of Black people being, mistreated, even experimented on in medical settings.
It's horrifying, but yeah, not surprising.
Unfortunately, no.
And that reminds me actually of a story from one of the personal narratives we read.
Oh, yeah.
A young woman talked about her grandmother's absolute terror of hospitals
Really?
because of these stories she'd heard about Black people being mistreated in those settings.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though she hadn't personally experienced it,
Wow.
this fear, it just became so ingrained in their family.
That's such a powerful example of how, the past shapes the present.
Definitely.
It really speaks to the idea of intergenerational trauma, too.
Which is a key concept here.
Definitely. The trauma of slavery, segregation, and ongoing discrimination.
It doesn't just disappear.
It doesn't. It gets passed down.
Through families,
Yeah.
impacting, mental well-being across generations.
Yeah. Think of it like a family recipe passed down, right?
Oh, I like it.
Just like specific ingredients shape the dish, those historical experiences shape the mental and emotional landscape of, families and communities.
It's a great analogy.
So it helps explain why, even though we've made some progress, the Black community still faces these significant mental health disparities.
Yeah, and our sources are painting a pretty stark picture here. Higher rates of conditions like PTSD,
Depression,
limited access to care.
and the stigma.
Oh, right, the stigma within the community about seeking help.
It can be tough.
It feels like a really heavy burden to carry.
It is. But it's super important to recognize the incredible resilience, too.
Right, the community's strength.
Because despite all these challenges, there's this powerful legacy of overcoming adversity,
Yeah, it is inspiring to see that, despite these really tough challenges, there's this incredible resilience and community strength, like you said.
Yeah.
And our sources really emphasize how important those social support networks are, right?
Huge.
Churches, extended families, community organizations, they provide this buffer.
This buffer against the stress and hardship.
Yeah.
They offer a sense of belonging, of shared experience.
And it's like culturally relevant support, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Totally.
Which is so important.
Yeah, and there was this great example in, I think it was one of the research papers,
Oh, yeah.
about a community garden project in Chicago.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that.
Yeah, it brought together
A lot of whom were dealing with mental health challenges, if I remember correctly.
Exactly.
To grow food
Connect with nature.
and just support each other, right?
Yeah, it was really cool.
So it wasn't just about, like, gardening.
No.
There was this deeper layer of, like, fostering agency, connection.
Feeling, yeah.
And that's what we're seeing more of, right?
Totally.
This real push for culturally sensitive approaches
To mental health care.
that recognize the unique needs of the Black community.
For sure.
One of the research papers mentioned how therapists need to be trained in cultural humility
Oh, that's so important.
to understand their own biases. Yeah, the historical context of their clients' struggles.
It goes beyond just therapists, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's about this whole ecosystem
Of support
that feels safe.
and relevant.
Yeah.
We see examples of this in our sources, faith leaders talking about mental wellness in their sermons.
Right.
Community centers offering, support groups specifically for Black youth.
Oh, wow.
Even barbershops becoming
yeah.
these spaces for open conversations about mental health.
That's so interesting. Like meeting people where they are,
Totally.
creating these really informal spaces for support.
And we can't forget about representation either.
Oh, of course.
Seeing Black mental health professionals
Celebrities
talking about their experience
helps break down the stigma.
and shows others they're not alone.
Exactly.
Oh, and we have this great quote from one of the personal narratives.
For so long, I thought I was the only one struggling with anxiety. Then I saw this actress I admire talking about her own journey, and it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders.
That's powerful.
So powerful.
Those shared stories really matter.
They do.
They create hope, a sense of possibility.
And they show people that healing is possible.
Exactly.
So taking a step back here,
Yeah.
where do we go from here? We've seen these historical roots of distrust,
The systemic barriers.
the cultural strengths.
Yeah.
It's a complex picture.
It is complex. Yeah.
There's no simple fix,
Nope.
but our sources, they do point to a lot of reason for optimism.
Right.
There's this growing movement to address mental health disparity.
Create more equitable systems of care, too.
Yeah, and there are some organizations doing amazing work in this space.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective,
They're doing great things.
raising awareness,
Providing resources.
advocating for policy changes.
And, individuals can play a role, too.
What can people do?
Like even small things.
Oh, okay, like what?
Educating yourself's a good place to start.
Okay, so like learning about the history.
The systemic barriers.
Yeah, and challenging our own biases.
For sure.
It starts with awareness.
Definitely. And then talking about it.
Oh, right, like having open and honest conversation
With friends, colleagues, yeah.
about mental health,
It all helps to break down that stigma.
the stigma that keeps people from getting help.
Exactly. And supporting the organizations on the front lines.
Yeah, those groups doing the real work.
Yeah. Donate your time, money, amplify their voices.
Advocate for policies that, promote access to care.
Create this culture of care
Of understanding.
where mental well-being is just as important as physical health.
Absolutely.
Hmm?
Okay, so before we wrap up, there's one question that's been kind of bouncing around in my head.
Yeah. What is it?
Given this distrust of institutions, we've been talking about how can mental health services be made more, accessible and trustworthy for the Black community.
That's a big one.
It feels like we need some really creative solutions here.
Yeah, it's not just about increasing the number of therapists, right?
Mm.
It's about building that trust
Right.
and creating systems that actually meet people's needs.
Yeah, and one of the research papers talked about culturally tailored interventions,
Oh, that's interesting.
therapies adapted to the, specific cultural values and experiences of the Black community.
I think that's super important.
Can you give an example of what that would look like?
Sure, yeah. So it could be something like incorporating faith-based principles into therapy
Okay.
or, addressing those unique stressors that come with dealing with racism and discrimination.
Stuff that traditional therapy may not fully grasp.
Exactly, yeah. And there was another source that mentioned task shifting,
Cast shifting.
which I thought was fascinating.
What is that?
So it's the idea of training community members like barbers, hairstylists, faith leaders
Oh, wow.
to provide basic mental health support
Interesting.
and connect people with resources.
So it's about like leveraging those existing relationships
Yeah, those trusted figures
Uh.
within the community.
to make help more accessible.
Exactly.
It makes sense,
Yeah.
It can feel a lot less intimidating to open up to someone you know and trust rather than going to like a formal mental health setting.
Definitely.
Were there any other innovative solutions from our sources that stood out to you?
Well, there's also a lot of buzz around using technology to bridge the gap.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, things like telehealth platforms,
Mesa.
mental health apps designed for, Black
Right,
users,
right.
even just like social media campaigns to raise awareness.
And destigmatize seeking help.
Yeah,
I can see how technology can play a huge role, especially in reaching younger generations.
absolutely. It's about meeting people where they are
Whether that's online.
or in their local barbershop.
So, to wrap things up, after going through all this, what stands out to you the most?
I think, honestly, just the resilience of the Black community.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Their ability to create healing and support in the face of such adversity, it's really inspiring.
Yeah,
And I'm really hopeful about the growing awareness and, these innovative solutions we're
me
seeing.
too.
It feels like we're at this turning point.
I hope so.
But this is a conversation that needs to keep going, right?
Oh, for sure. We can't let it fade.
Absolutely not. We have to keep listening, learning, and working towards a future where mental well-being is a right, not a privilege.
For everyone.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to all our sources, additional resources, and info on those amazing organizations we mentioned.
Doing such great work.
Keep the conversation going.